What's up, y'all? Rush Rucker from GoVols247 coming to you at the GoVols247 Podcast. I messed up the intro, but I'll go with it. We'll just go with it. We'll leave it live. We'll do it live. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope everything is going all right in your world. Recording this on a Wednesday afternoon here in God's own Knoxville, Tennessee. Things going all right today. A little unseasonably warm, which that sort of goes against the old joke that Philip Fulmer would make every single year, because the first day it was cold in Knoxville, like really cold, was always the week of the Tennessee-Kentucky game. And Philip Fulmer would walk out on a Monday or Tuesday after practice. He'd walk out there, and this is back in the days when we talked to him on the field after practice, and he would say, "Oh, it must be Kentucky week." And then the few years where it would get cold, like a week or two before that, he would walk out and be like, "Oh, I didn't know we were playing Kentucky this week." It was a good old time. There was like a couple decades there where you just knew that joke was coming. And that joke would not be coming this week because it is not cold. Kentucky is coming to Neyland Stadium, though. If Tennessee were going to Kroger Field, the artist formerly known as Commonwealth Stadium, this week, I am convinced it would be about 22 degrees, perhaps with a 10-degree wind chill or thereabouts. But nonetheless, the Vols and the Wildcats continuing the beer barrel battle. Bring that sucker back. I'm going to talk about that. I've been talking about it all week. I'm talking about it for 10 years. I'm going to keep talking about it every day of every Kentucky week until they do the right thing and bring back the damn barrel. And I'm not sure, to be honest with you, if our guest for this episode is with me on that, but I'm going to ask him.
Yes.
Sweet. We got Aaron Gershon from Cat's Paws. Does a great job covering all things UK for the 24/7 Sports, CBS, Viacom, Paramount, whoever corporate daddy owns us right now, all of that. Aaron, how you doing up there in Lexington, my man?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me. And yeah, you got to bring the beer barrel back. I love rivalry game trophies. Kentucky has one with Louisville. It's not like, it's just it's the Governor's Cup. It's a generic trophy. There's nothing really, even has the Kroger logo in it. Like, it's not exciting. But that beer barrel, it needs to come back. I mean, there's some really good rivalry trophies across the country. That beer barrel was up there with the best. I understand Kentucky was probably sick of never bringing it home. But bring it back. Bring it back. I love it.
And before anyone gets upset about this, I think we all understand why the barrel had to go away for a while. There was that tragic incident with the Kentucky player, and it hey, all for taking that thing away for a couple of years. However, my argument would be that was a while ago. Now booze is sold in the stadium, for God's sake. Like, I think it's
sure
okay,
is.
And people always say, why don't you call it the bourbon barrel or the whiskey barrel? And my response has always been, because they would never agree on what to call it. Would you call it the Sour Mash whiskey barrel, or would you call it the Kentucky bourbon barrel? You just, they couldn't agree on that probably. So just call it the beer barrel. That is what it is. It's fine. Bring it back. It's awesome. I love that trophy. It's still just sitting there in Knoxville in a storage closet, and they can't bring it out because the administrations won't agree to do the right thing and bring it back.
Bring it back.
Bring it back. Although I did get Chris Lowe to join the cause this season, so I got some. I added a little bit of pizzazz to it this season. I got CeeLo on board, so hopefully we can keep this thing going and we can make it happen. But Aaron, I'm trying to think of a way to ask this.
How I know where you're going with this. Go ahead.
How are things up that way? I know it's obviously on a completely serious note with Mark Stoops losing his mother. That's awful. Just thoughts, prayers to that entire wonderful football family, all those people. But we'll set that to the side and say Kentucky has played 8 games. It's 3-5. It's 1-5 in the SEC. Looked early in the season like this might be another one of those kind of feisty Mark Stoops teams that would maybe, not win 11, 12 games or anything like that, but would be competitive, would be in the mix, would maybe beat a couple people that you didn't expect it to beat. Hadn't been the case other than the Ole Miss win. But from the first month to the second month of the season, what's happened there?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. And obviously, putting aside what you mentioned there with the Coach Stoops' family and, hope, all is going as well as it can, with them. And we haven't been able to meet with Mark yet this week. We'll meet with him tomorrow, Thursday. So, we'll see how the vibes are there. But it's just been – it starts with the offense, first of all. I mean, the offense has been terrible. Just to be blunt, they're, I believe, 116th in the country in total offense. Their passing offense is 121st, worse than the SEC. And I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I think, first of all, they still just have not been able to turn things around up front. And they were, in fairness, they were dealt a really hard blow 4 years ago when John Schlarman, the offensive line coach from 2013 to when he passed away in 2020, he was the one that built that big blue wall culture. He was able to find some recruiting wins with Landon Young, who was a highly recruited guy. I think he might have even been a 5-star. Drake Jackson, high 4-star guy. And then find some guys that maybe teams were sleeping on, like Luke Fortner and Darian Kennard. And he did a great job developing so many different guys and having so much depth. And since he passed away, it just hasn't been the same. Eric Wolford was here in 2021. He had a lot of success with a lot of Schlarman's players. He did bring in Dare Rosenthal, a transfer from LSU, who had a good year at left tackle. And then Wolford leaves for Alabama. And, Wolford, he gets heat for being like Alabama, his 2 years there, really good run protecting units, not very good pass blocking. And that's kind of been what the trend has been here in Lexington this season. But him leaving like he did abruptly, what he's best at is recruiting. I mean, he was the primary guy on Barryon Brown and the secondary guy on Deion Walker, two of the most talented players, Deion Walker being the best player on this roster. So you lost that momentum quick. Then Zach Yenser comes in from the NFL. Great guy. Players loved him. Didn't get the job done recruiting wise or coaching wise. So now you're back to Wolford and trying to rebuild that, and that they're just behind the 8 ball on the offensive line, and they haven't gotten good play from 2 veteran tackles, one who Tennessee fans know and I'm sure love to death, and Gerald Mincy. I'm sure we'll get to him as this rolls on. And then, Marcus Cox, a 7th-year senior, has just not had a good season. And then there's the aspect of the offensive coordinator, lack of continuity there. Bush Hamden's obviously the 3rd offense coordinator in 3 years, if you and 5th in 5 years, really, if you count Liam Cohen coming and going. So it's just been a lack of continuity. And in this case, it's harder because Hamden didn't come in until February, and Kentucky had already made their portal decisions. I mean, they went out and picked Brock Vandegrift. They went out and picked Jamari Macklin, a wide receiver from North Texas. They picked Mincy. Jalen Farmer, who has actually had a nice year at right guard. Like, the portal pieces that they brought in place were there for Hamden. He didn't have a say in them. Say Hamden comes in December, maybe you're getting, what's his first name from Arkansas? Talon Green, who was the transfer from Boise State. Maybe you bring him to the SEC to Kentucky instead, and look how much different the year could be with how well Green has played at Arkansas. So I think those are the 2 biggest issues. And then, defensively, look, they were a top 10 unit up until 2 weeks ago. And I'm not one to make excuses, but injuries have just decimated them the last 2 weeks. They lost J.J. Weaver last week. They lost Derek Jackson. Deion Walker's not 100%. They haven't had Maxwell Harrison since week 4. They're just a mess defensively, and the depth isn't necessarily what they need it to be. And that, that's another story where, they haven't been able to necessarily recruit and develop the way they want to in this portal era. So, that's a kind of a basic summary of what has gone wrong. This year is just not, usually they do a really decent job, I would say, at overcoming adversity like they did with the South Carolina game. And it looked like they were set to do it again. This year, it just hasn't been the case. They've let things snowball, where we haven't really seen a snowball like this since probably, not counting 2013, because that was such a rebuild year in Stoops' first year, but probably since the end of the Joker Phillips era, which is not a time any Kentucky fan wants to be compared to.
Yeah, there's so much meat on the bone there in a good way. There's a lot to discuss. I guess I'll start before going offense or defense. I'll go big picture and say that, Tennessee did not play last weekend. And so when I wasn't, chasing a 2-year-old human and 4-year-old corgi all over this house or at a pumpkin patch or whatever else we were doing all over the weekend, I was able to watch, a lot of games and put the monster to bed, and then was able to watch a lot of that Kentucky Auburn game, and was kind of, alternating there. I kind of had the TV on one game and the iPad on the other, so I was kind of switching back and forth there with the two big SEC games last weekend at the same time. And Kentucky Auburn was certainly a game for Tennessee fans and for people who cover Tennessee. It was an important one to watch, and so
sure,
I was a little pleasantly surprised early on.
Yeah, no doubt.
Despite everything that's gone on with Kentucky in the past, couple weeks, the crowd was still there. It was still a great atmosphere. It looked good. I mean, the football itself was okay, but the atmosphere looked really good. So that was the pleasant surprise. The not so pleasant surprise was that I don't question or don't like to question, and very rarely do question effort.
Sure.
But one thing with the Stoops team is that even when there have been some limitations in certain positions, they have played with an edge. They've played nasty.
Question.
Tennessee fans know this. I mean, because they've seen Kentucky and Tennessee come to blows a couple times. Like, those guys play hard. They play with an edge. And a couple times over the past few weeks, I haven't seen that edge. So I'm asking, is there a little bit of either injury issue, motivation issue, anything like that you've been able to pick up?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. I think the injuries have a lot to do with it, and who's on the field in those. It's really been in the fourth quarter the last 2 weeks, the Florida game and then the Auburn game. The Auburn game was more unacceptable to me because it was still a one-score game. And I honestly think, and I'm sure we'll talk about the quarterback situation, but I think that decision might have had something to do with it as well. But I think the big thing is, defensively, man, like I said, they've been a top 10 unit and they have gotten no help. Like, even the game they won at Ole Miss, Kentucky did obviously, go down and drive for a touchdown, which was huge. Brock Vandegrift on 4th and 7 from their own 20 hits Barry Brown for that big gain, sets up a touchdown. Kentucky's defense is able to get a stop and win the game. But it just feels like this defense has had, really for 3 seasons, has had their backs against the wall, and they have made stop after stop. And eventually it's just like, we can't do this anymore. Like, we are carrying this team as far as we can take it. We're bringing, Georgia to the very end, to the very bitter end. We go and basically carry the team to a win at Ole Miss. Even Vandy, that Vandy's a better team. Kentucky, should have still won that game, but the defense, wasn't bad in that game. The offense just gave nothing. Like, this defense has given it all, their all for 3 years. And I think there's some frustration that's finally bowling over where, like you said, Mark Stoops has done a really good job at having a culture where they have just continued to play really hard, fight till there's triple zeros, and give teams that maybe are in a different weight class like Tennessee fits that they weren't expecting. But I think it's getting to the point where now, like, this defense is tired. They're beat up physically. I mean, their injury report that you're going to see come out tonight is going to have several defensive starters and key second teamers on it. And I think it's starting to boil over. But I think, too, maybe a coaching decision that happened last week didn't sit well. I don't know that for fact, but I'm just speculating. It might have felt like that by making the quarterback change when they did in the game with what the score was, maybe there was a feel like we're not doing everything we need to win this game. And that's a little bit of a scary place to be. But overall, I would say this team still does fight better than most 3 and 5 teams would.
Yeah.
I think there is a care to this team. I mean, whenever we're out at practice doing our interviews, a lot of them are still, most of the team is still out there getting extra work, meeting with their position coaches, catching extra balls on jugs, doing the things they need to do off the field and they're saying the right things. They don't, like, you can tell when guys are defeated. The only one who sounds defeated in press conferences is Mark Stoops. Everyone else, the players sound, as good as they can in a situation like this. So, I expect them to go into Tennessee with this rivalry. They usually play best as an underdog and at least fight early in the game and try to keep it, as close as they can, keep it within a puncher's chance. But as soon as that score gets out of hand, assuming it does, that's when, I wouldn't be surprised if you see some of the stuff we saw in the fourth quarter of the last couple of weeks. Yeah,
I'm doing my best to not single out Stoops for any specific stuff right now. We're all humans at the end of the day. I think we all are. And I know how close I am with my own mom, and I can't even imagine. Like, I will crawl in a hole when that time inevitably comes. I will crawl in a hole for a long period of time, and we'll have to be dragged back out of it. And so, I don't want to. I don't want to go there necessarily, so I won't.
Sure.
But I will ask this: if I would imagine, because these things sometimes they mean exactly what we think they do to players, and sometimes they don't. Because you forget sometimes that these are 18 to 22 or 23-year-old college males, and a lot of times, fans talk about rivalries and this pageantry and this tradition and this heat, and a lot of times players are like, no, every game's the same, and at the end of it, I want to know which girl I'm going out with tonight. Like, they don't, it goes in,
and a lot of these kids are not from their respective states too. So
yes, I mean, so now some of them it does mean every single bit that it does to fans, and there is a pride to players that they always want to win. But my question is this: the ability, when you are in the situation Kentucky's in right now, there's a couple of things that you can play for. One, if you're an upperclassman, you can play for, your future in this game, right?
No question.
That's an important one. Or if you're a young player, you can if you're just angry at Kentucky, you can try to put your best film out there to maybe go to the portal after the season for some guys. We'll see. I don't know. But there is also the ability to play for a bowl game, which is another opportunity for young guys on the team to get practice moving forward. And then there's also this little possibility of pissing in Tennessee's cornflakes. And if you go back to some of those years where Tennessee went through that decade where it was just the dysfunctional decade where just things, sometimes it was like you could see the team kind of rally around this time of year, trying to like piss in Bama's cornflakes, or trying to, like, it was a little something that you could take a rival and just be like, oh, you think you're playing for a title? Maybe you're not. Like,
they did it to Kentucky in 2018.
Yeah, and it didn't always work out, but it did in some cases work out where they could kind of mess with the rival season. Is that the kind of thing? Like, I would think, just a guess, that this is a week where Kentucky could circle the wagons, put every chip into the middle, and then if it doesn't go well this week, then super concerns moving forward. But I would have to think, given the lopsided nature of this rivalry, this is one where the guys, especially the guys from the state of Tennessee, will be ready to go.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, we saw it last season, right, where Kentucky was 6-5 going into Louisville, and Louisville was ranked, I think, 10th in the country. They only had one loss. Their college football playoff hopes were slim but alive, and Kentucky went in there and beat them, and they played their butts off in that game. The compete level was there from getting into a skirmish pregame. Like, they wanted to stick it to Louisville and be that thorn in their side and be the team that knocked them out of playoff contention. And I'm sure there's that and that was kind of, they didn't say it was too early in the year to bring up the playoffs, but that was definitely the vibe I got going into Ole Miss, where it was like, hey, like, no one's giving us a shot anyway. They're telling us that Ole Miss is the greatest, they're the greatest show on turf. Like, they're going to be the best offense in the country, and we want to go stick it to them. And, and in that case, they were pissed off about what happened down in Oxford 2 years ago when they were, a penalty away from winning that game. So they were able to go handle business. So I do think they're going to come in with that attitude. I don't think they're going to come in defeated. Like, the fan base is going to come into it. Like, they're going to bring it their all. And like I said early on, I think you're going to see all the fight that they have in them. Is it going to be enough just because of the Jimmies and Joes? I'm not sure. But this is a prideful team. This is a prideful program at this point in what Mark Stoops has built. So they just don't strike me as a bunch just being around them and covering them that's going to come in and think they have no chance. They're going to come give it their all. And if it's not enough, it's not enough. No one was expecting them to win. And then, like you said, we'll see what happens. They play Murray after their bye week. That'll be a win. And then they have to go to Texas. That'll probably be rough, but, they'll have another chance to kind of stick it at someone when they play Louisville at the end. We'll monitor those last 3 weeks when we get there. But I do think you're going to see, at least early, this team come out wanting all the smoke and trying to handle it. And if it's too much, it's too much.
Yeah, my thought would be, I don't think you're going to see a ton of Kentucky fans necessarily going out of their way to make this trip down the mountain this week. And so I don't know. And then it'll be Tennessee. It'll be Neyland at night, fireworks, dark mode.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
But I think the Kentucky players themselves, at least early in the game, will do everything they can to feed off of that and to be the spoiler. And I think there is some tangible value to that. Now, does it mean more than all the adversity you're facing? Maybe not. A lot of times it doesn't. But I think you can see that the fight, at least from the guys, would be there. But there are plenty more questions about not Tennessee. We do that too. But Kentucky's offense, Kentucky's defense, some of these things that happened last week, some of the things we've seen this season. There's a lot more to discuss about the Wildcats, and we will do that. But before we do that, we will step away for just a minute. We're going to pay some bills, listen to some products, services, in-house ads, etc. And then we'll come right back here with Aaron Gershon from Cat's Paws right here on the GoVols247 Podcast. #ad. Welcome back to the GoVols247 Podcast, brought to you by whatever products, services, and in-house ads you just heard a moment ago. During that commercial break, Wes Rucker coming to you from Fort Rucker Studio, joined by our good friend Aaron Gershon from Cat's Paws up there in Lexington. That covers a great job. All those guys do covering UK, the Big Blue for the 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, etc. network. Having a good time discussing a beer barrel game. Again, we're bringing back the barrel. Aaron has decided that he's on the bring back the barrel. Need a hashtag bring back. I don't know if it's going to bring back the barrels too long, BBTB, or just hashtag more barrel, or I don't know. We got to figure out a hashtag for it when we start, because we're started a militia here, and we're going to don't tread on us bringing back our beer barrel, basically is what we're saying here. We need one of those flags that all those people, all those goobers are out there flying. We need some of those. We need some of those flags. We're going to get this thing going, but we are discussing more about Kentucky and Tennessee. We're going to get right to that as soon as you get a quick reminder from us to please go in there and rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Listen, guys, anywhere in the world you can cast the Find Pod, you can find the GoVols247 Podcast. Every single app that is out there, basically, that is worth anything, that is pumping out podcasts, you can find this podcast there. It is for free. And also, you can go to YouTube and Facebook on GoVols247's YouTube and Facebook pages, and you can get the video of it there. And we do all of that for free, and we're happy to do that for free. We want to keep doing that for free as long as we possibly can, hopefully forever. But it'll help us do it for free if you all go in there and rate, review, and subscribe, please. That does so much for everything. And for the algorithms now, especially if you leave a fresh review, that really helps us out too. If you're just leaving whatever the star rating is, whatever you decide, hey, that's great. But if you go in there and leave a review, that helps quite a bit. And also, excuse me, go tell people that you know, that you see wearing Tennessee orange, or in this case, Kentucky blue, and you see, hey, you want to talk about this game, or hey, you want to hear about this, or hey, go to the GoVols247 Podcast. We're right there. You can get all of it there. Please go do that. If you're already doing all that stuff, thank you. We love you. If not,
award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Right back to it here, Aaron. I guess I'll start with the offense for Kentucky. Yeah. So, we'll just get right into it, right? Let's go. This is like a torture that's starting like on step 5. We're not going for the fingernails first. We're going right for like the drawing and quartering, I guess. But what did you expect from this offense? I mean, Vandegrift was a big time prospect. He turned a lot of heads when he chose to go to Kentucky, because not being the starter at Georgia these days is kind of like for years, like not being a starter at Alabama was. It's like, that's not necessarily an indictment of you as a player. You can be exceptionally good. I think someone like Brandon Kennedy was a really nice center for Tennessee who just couldn't crack the line. He was always in the rotation, but couldn't start at Alabama. So he goes to Tennessee and he's able to do that. Miles Kitselman now, Tennessee's one of Tennessee's tight ends, came from Alabama, same thing. So Vandegrift gets there. He has always aced the eyeball test. He is a good-looking young quarterback. He is an athlete. He has a big arm. He is a guy who people like being around. He's always had high character marks in that regard. I'm not aware of him picking up any of the 800 speeding or reckless driving citations during his time in Athens.
Not him.
And so he gets there, and there is some excitement because there are dudes in that Kentucky receiver corps. There are dudes, Brown, Key. These guys are dudes. I mean,
Yes.
not like
Especially
good
Key.
players. Yes, not
Yep.
just good players. These are dudes. And always Kentucky's got a couple running backs who can always give you a hard time. You thought the big blue wall, even if it's not been the big blue wall recently, that it's still got some guys up there that are good players. You see some pieces.
Sure.
And in your head, you start putting those together before a season starts, and you think be a pretty solid offense. I mean, it's a Stoops offense at Kentucky, so maybe it's not going to score 35 or 40 a game,
Right?
But it could do some stuff, and it hasn't done stuff. And so why has it not done stuff? And why was Vandegrift benched for the entire second half last week? That didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the second question because it makes no sense to me either. And the explanation Mark Stoops gave, was the typical, we benched our quarterback, wanted to provide a spark. But my big thing with that was, one, whenever the offense has been able to produce this year, it's because Brock Vandegrift has played really well. Like the Ole Miss game, he, completed, I believe, 65% of his passes for 240 plus yards, a touchdown. The big play to Barryon Brown on 4th and 7, backed up at their own 20 when Stoops broke character and was super aggressive, and it paid off.
How about that? You coach with a pair, your team plays with a pair. How about them apples?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, obviously he played well in the 2 cupcake games, right, against Ohio and Southern Miss, but he even had moments in some of the bad games where, Florida, he had 2 interceptions. You look at that doesn't look good. They were both drops that went right into Florida, got Florida defenders' hands, one by Brown, one by the tight end Dingle. He also threw a 45-yard touchdown down the field in that game. Auburn early on, he had a terrible pick in the second quarter that got him benched, I think. But early on, he was 4 for 7 for 72 yards, and had him and Dane Key were on the same page making some highlight reel plays. And they got up to a 10-0 lead, their best first quarter of SEC play. So I think benching him is a mistake in that regard, but it's also a mistake. And I'm not trying. Gavin Wimstead's a great kid. He's from Owensboro, Kentucky. He's a guy that, good athlete, but he's a known commodity. Like, he started for 2 years at Rutgers. We know what he is. He's an inaccurate passer that can run. The problem is Kentucky has used him in such predictable run spots where basically they'll go into the Wildcat formation, and 9 times out of 10, it means it's going to be a Wimstat run. Occasionally he'll throw a deep ball and they'll try to get a splash play out of it they've gotten a couple PIs that way. And then occasionally he'll hand it off. But 9 times out of 10, he's just calling his own number. And last week he did that 3 times in the first half and ran for 1 yard because Auburn knew it was coming. So I just think they set what you're getting from Wimstat. And for me, benching him for the entire second half was a mistake. It would be one thing if you had another Brock Vandegrift on the roster, right, where it's like, okay, this guy was a former 4-star recruit. He hasn't played yet. He's been on the bench for a year. Let's see what we've got. They don't have that on their roster. They have a true freshman in Cutter Boley they really like, but you're not throwing him behind this offensive line in a 1-score game nonetheless. So that's my rant on that whole situation. But going back to just the offensive issues as a whole, it starts up front. The tackle play from Marcus Cox and Old Tennessee friend Gerald Mincy has not been good. In fairness to Mincy, he has been injured really all year. He missed last week's game against Auburn after leaving the Florida game early. No clue. I am assuming he's going to be out. Don't know.
If he plays in this game, I guarantee you he
I need it.
Putting in a fight.
Yeah,
those are 2 walking 15-yard penalties.
I would love to see it. I think from the entertainment standpoint, I don't know what his status is. We'll get the injury report Wednesday night. But if not, it'll be Malachi Wood, who's a redshirt freshman that just he's got a good future ahead of him. He's 6'8", 320, but he's young guy at right tackle. And then the run game hasn't really been that bad. Like Demi Sumo Karmbe has done a really nice job this season. They haven't, unfortunately, Chip Trainum, who was supposed to be the starter, has been hurt. He's only played in 1 game at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if they hold him out this week, try to get him back after the bye, because then they'd hold him to 4 games and be able to redshirt him and have him back next year. And then they have a redshirt freshman in Jamarion Wilcox, who is averaging 6.4 yards per carry. The problem is they just, for some reason, whether it's, wanting to I don't know, wanting to please these receivers, wanting to impress recruits, they just don't commit to the run, and they end up in predictable pass situations, and because they're starting with a first down incompletion and they're 2nd and 10, and it's just made them allow defense to pin their ears back and go after the quarterback, which has been a problem. And then at receiver, you're right, they do have dudes, and Dane Key has been spectacular this season. I mean, he's 7th, despite being on the worst passing offense in the SEC. He has 587 yards, 39 catches, 7th in the SEC in receiving yards. I think just 1 drop all year. He put on 15 pounds of muscle over the offseason. He looks like an NFL wide receiver. Barryon Brown has all the speed in the world. The consistency, though, it's been the story of his career, where there's been some big drops, one that led to an interception at Florida. There's been some just inabilities to miss tackles that he was breaking early in his career. Maybe just teams getting the scouting report and knowing, what he likes to do, hasn't been able to adjust. So it's kind of been an up and down year for him. And then they brought in Jamori Macklin to play the slot, a guy who was a 1,000-yard receiver at North Texas last year, and he's gotten 6 catches all year. They haven't been able to get him involved. They have no other wide receiver outside of Kean Brown that even has 100 yards. So it's been a huge problem there, and I don't foresee it getting better, to be honest with you, anytime soon, unless they start committing to the run and throwing teams off balance offensively. But it's at this point in the year, it's kind of, they are who they are. They're not a good offense. They could have an identity, but they choose for whatever reason not to commit to it. And it goes back to what I said in the first segment there, where Hamden has a bunch of pieces that he didn't pick out. That's not necessarily an excuse, but it does handicap you a little bit as a play caller if you're not confident in the guys you have. And it just seems like there's a lack of trust in guys on this offense not named either Dane Key or Deme Sumo Karnbe. It seems like there's very little confidence in anybody else. And then, up front with Eli Cox, who's playing great at center. He's just, he's on a bad offensive line, so he gets thrown into the mix. And then same with Jalen Farmer, the right guard, who's a transfer from Florida. He's had a nice year, but other than that, I don't think they have much trust in anyone else on their offense.
Yeah, and the quarterback predicament for this game for me, if I'm Kentucky, is it's really, really a tough decision to make, and I actually think maybe a more complex decision than a lot of us would think from the outside because of this specific matchup. And the problem is there's a lot of problems against Tennessee's defense if you're an offense, but one of the biggest ones is you just can't line the ball up and run right at them.
Nope.
It is a brick wall that it's just, they rotate 12 dudes in there. They're fresh. They're linebackers. Even with Keenan Peely injured, their linebackers are filling in the gaps. The safeties come down in the box and fill in their gaps for the most part. They are really hard to just line up and run the ball against. And even though they've been better against some of these dual threat quarterbacks this season, that is still probably a safer bet. So if you're Kentucky and you're trying to generate rushing offense in order to get some separation in the pass game so you can have a chance to make those big plays, you have to find a way to run the ball a little bit. And I think Wimsatt probably gives them maybe a better chance to get some yards on the ground, but then he's not as good a passer for those situations. So it's a really big problem. And also, I don't know that Wimsatt, has ever played. I don't know if Vandegrift really has, but I definitely don't think Wimsatt's maybe played an environment that's going to be quite as loud as it will be in Neyland. He's played the Big Ten, so he's been to some places. I don't want to say he hasn't, but that noise, especially with the tackles aren't playing great, like that's going to be tough. And so that's why I think it's not just a simple case of, Vandegrift's the better player, put Vandegrift in there. That's my only question in this week is maybe because of the matchup, they have to mix it. Yeah.
Wimsatt, he had starts at Michigan, Penn State, and Iowa last year, but it was Rutgers, right? So you don't know what the environment.
That's what I'm saying. It's not
it was. So you don't know what the environment was. I 100% agree with you. And the thing is too, like Vandegrift, I think Wimsatt definitely from a physicality standpoint, 6'3", 230, he's kind of built like a big running back or a tight end. He definitely is the more imposing, harder guy to bring down. But I think he's kind of unless they come up with start scheming some better things up. It's kind of been a one-trick pony on how they've used them in the run game. It's been just going up the guts or trying to find a little hole outside. There hasn't been much creativity in it. And I think Brock Vandegrift, at least, he's been good on scramble drills where if the pocket collapses, he's been able to get out and get some yards on the ground. He's actually done better with some of the RPO runs than Wimsatt has. So I think that honestly, both of them give you a threat with their legs. And for me, I just would lean toward the guy who can actually at least give you something in the passing game in Vandegrift. But yeah, I can definitely see that was Wimsatt too. And I'm very curious to see what they do. I think it's going to be Vandegrift if I had to put my money on it. I don't know that for fact. They're keeping it very close to the vest. But yeah, they definitely need to establish something in the quarterback run game. I know obviously against this offense, you're not going to be able to just line it up and go up the gut, but they have some running backs in Sumo Karmbay and Wilcox who they are good at outside zone runs. And if they can get, if they can just put Tennessee on their toes a little bit, it would be huge. And, Dane Key has given a problem to every single corner he's lined up against. So that's really
a fun matchup because Tennessee's corners might be the best duo of top guys in the league. I'm sure Georgia and others would have some arguments there, and there's some really good ones out there. But I mean, the way that McCoy especially and also Gibson are playing, either one of those guys matched up against Key is a great matchup.
Absolutely, yeah. Georgia's really the only team he struggled against all year. So, and I guess South Carolina, but everyone struggled against South Carolina. So I think Kentucky only completed 3 passes in that game. But that's going to be the only way you can generate offense if you're Kentucky. You got to somehow keep Tennessee off balanced, and just running it up the gut and doing what they've been doing most of the season is not going to work. And it's really hard to ask an offense to change its entire identity in a week, but you have to think there's got to be, Mark Stoops said really for the first time in quite a while, both about the quarterback situation and just the offensive operation as a whole, that all options are on the table. And that makes me think they at least are going to try something different this week. Whether that's going to be successful or not is to be determined, and where my money is unlikely. But, I rather at least see them try something out and say, okay, at least we did this and came up with this. And if it fails, you can criticize that. But you just can't keep doing that. And Bush Hamdan, I think, said this almost word for word in his press conference this week. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect the same result, which is obviously the definition of insanity.
Yeah. And that's where, Kentucky has to be good on third down. It has to run clock.
Yeah.
And so you want to take vertical shots because that's where you got some dudes who can maybe give Tennessee some problems, but
you don't want to give the ball back to the offense.
Don't help you. And while this hasn't been a classic Heupel offense in the sense of scoring a gajillion points a game, it still moves fast and it still has a bunch of dudes on it, and the picture just hasn't come together yet quite. So, but you saw, I think, 24 points in the second half against Bama. Like they get going and they can still hit you for those big ones. And you're on the road, you're playing at Neyland at night. You have to keep the crowd from just completely ruining your night. So you got to try to bleed it a little bit. You got to bleed clock, do the same thing that Kentucky did against Georgia and Ole Miss, which is find a way to keep the thing moving and frustrate people and keep the thing quiet or keep the other team from getting momentum. You got to do that stuff. And
that's the only way.
But you have some guys to take shots with. So my guess, it's just a guess, misdirection stuff. You're going to see a lot because Tennessee is susceptible to to misdirection, to throwbacks, to misdirection runs, because they swarm, and when they swarm, sometimes they overcommit, and they can get out of gap, and you can hit them for a big play there. So I would look for some misdirection stuff, but I'm sure Kentucky has watched film and seen the exact same thing. So but now going to the other side, Kentucky's defense early in the year especially, very, very good group, like you said, a top 10 group. And held Georgia in check. And again, Georgia has a couple games a year where it doesn't play great, but it does enough. And maybe that was the game, or maybe Kentucky was just really damn good. I don't know yet. Time will tell on that. But they kept Georgia in check. They kept Ole Miss in check. They've kept everybody except for the fourth quarter against Florida. They've kind of kept people for the most part in check. But the way that the thing ended at Florida and last week against a kind of a bad Auburn offense, they were able to, Jarquez Hunter just if I'm
Kroger
guys,
Field opposition record.
Yeah, and now you're facing Dylan Sampson and Deshaun Bishop the next week, and
yep,
that looks tough. But what you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but what was the deal with this defense early, and what's the deal now? Is it just a combination of injuries and results?
It is. I mean, again, you hate to make excuses, but when you're talking about your starting outside linebacker and JJ Weaver, who leads the team in sacks, didn't play the entire second half last week after he literally went down. He got a sack of Peyton Thorne with 10 seconds left in the opening half, and he was able to go back and line up so Auburn was out of timeouts. They had to scramble the field goal unit on, and they couldn't do it in time because Weaver, was strong enough to stay in there and line up, and then he went down and never came back. So Eric Jackson was on the injury report all week last week. Their starting inside linebackers led the team in tackles each of the last 2 seasons, and he went down and didn't play in the second half last week. Deion Walker was on the injury report all week. He was a game-time decision going into the game against Auburn. He ended up playing. He had a sack, but you could tell he was a tick slower than he usually is. And then Maxwell Harrison, who was voted a first-team All-SEC corner down in Dallas at SEC Media Days this year, guy who had 5 picks last year, 2 went for pick sixes. This year was a lockdown corner again, had a pick 6 early in the season, week 4 against Ohio. He hasn't played since that week 4 game against Ohio. He's had a shoulder injury, and I don't anticipate seeing him. Definitely won't anticipate seeing him this weekend. I'm not sure if you're going to see him again in the blue and white. I think the next time you're going to see him is probably on Sundays because he's going to be a second round draft pick. So they are just beat to hell, honestly, on all 3 levels of their defense. And that's very hard to overcome when you're talking about 4 of your 6 best defensive players. And then, run defense wise, they went into that Florida game literally ranked 10th in the country, stopping the run. They had not allowed a team to run more than 145 yards, which was Vanderbilt. They were just stout against the run. Georgia could not run the ball on them. I'm not even sure Georgia got to 100 that game. I'd have to go back and look. They just had been dominant. Ole Miss couldn't run the ball on them. It just dominant. And then between the injuries and then, like I said, with the score getting out of hand and the offense offering no resistance, I think you've just seen this defense get mentally worn out. And, they gave up the 278 to Jarquez Hunter last week. They gave up 5 rushing touchdowns to Jaden Baugh, who's a true freshman who was making his first career start for the Gators 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, there have been some really, really ugly numbers. Actually, I think they've averaged, if the last 2 seasons or the last 2 games was their season average in rushing, they would rank 132nd in the country. So it's been really bad against the run, which is not ideal, like you said, because you're facing Sampson and Bishop. Sampson being, I think, for my money, the best running back in the league, maybe only behind Hunter, and then Bishop as good a number 2 as there is in this league. So it's a very good run blocking offensive line. It's not an ideal time to be having your first real struggles stopping the run in 2 seasons. Really, outside of the Tennessee game last year, they were a top run defense, and the year before that, they were, I think, finished in the top 6 or 7. So it hasn't been an issue in several years here at Kentucky, but injuries and depth have hurt. And then in the pass defense, really that was the concern going into the year, was the depth at corner behind Max Harrison early on. Look, they beat Ole Miss without Max Harrison, which is still like mind-boggling. JQ Hardaway, number 6 outside, has had a nice season. He's really improved from a year ago. DJ Waller's done an okay job from Michigan to transfer there, but outside of that, they are they have a true freshman into Ryan Nichols, who's playing a lot, and not much else. So they are, and Waller got hurt last week, so I'm sure his name is going to be on this report too. So it's messy between injuries and lack of depth at corner. The safeties have been up and down all year, kind of like what they were last year. So look, this is when they're fully healthy and intact. This is a top 15 to 10 defense in the country. They really are. And they went out and proved it against elite offenses, but this is not the same defense that went into Oxford. It's not the same defense that played Georgia really well. And I'm curious when that report comes out, which guys are missing and how they're going to pick up the pieces. Because again, this is not the week this is Tennessee. They always give Kentucky fits with the tempo. They did a much better job against Ole Miss with tempo this year than they've ever done against Tennessee. But I'm just not as confident if they don't have at least some of the guys I mentioned out there. I mean, you're talking about some really good players who are going to be playing on Sundays.
Yeah, I think anyone who plays Ole Miss in a season before they play Tennessee, that's not a great thing for Tennessee.
Right.
And I think it's going to be the same way with Mississippi State with Lebby there. I think that's going to be a similar thing too. So now you're seeing at least some crossover in terms of tempo with Kiffin, and then both tempo and style with Lebby to Heupel, because obviously Lebby's one of the Heupel guys. So that's going to be interesting to me. And this would be such a different perhaps matchup in some ways if Kentucky had gotten the bye before Tennessee and not after. That would have been a huge deal for their defense. Yep. I think, for my money, Walker is, he's listed right now as like a top 20 pick. I see him as a top 10 pick. I think he is an absolute monster.
He's a game record.
That dude is 6'6" and 345 problems.
And he gets triple teamed. So everyone's like, oh, he only has 2 sacks. Last year he was getting double teamed and had 7.5. This year he's getting triple teamed.
That'd be a fun matchup because Tennessee in the guard box is pretty stout. So I bet Kentucky moves him around, especially if Weaver's not playing. They're going to probably move Walker around.
I don't think he's going to play. And Weaver, that's an unfortunate one. 6th-year senior is giving a lot to this program. He's from Kentucky, and you hate to see if that's how it's going to end for him. But it's other. They've been a good pass rush. That is one thing. Even with the, I guess not necessarily in the second half last week though. Auburn ran the ball almost every play in the second half last week. But pass rush wise, Kentucky has done a good job. I think they have 7 sacks their last 2 weeks. So, that has been a trend.
Against Tennessee, that's one bugaboo is that the protection from the offensive tackles, because Tennessee's had a nightmare health situation with its tackles all season. And so, if Kentucky can figure some things out there and keep that pass rush going, that perhaps changes the complexion of the game in some ways. But I guess that's my final couple questions here are, I guess I'll go first off. What I really don't like the football school / basketball school argument. I never have. I think
I don't either.
One of the things that I like, I think, I laugh because, it's some things sometimes, but Danny White, Tennessee's athletic director, has used the hashtag everything school thing for a while now. And for Tennessee, they've won 3 consecutive SEC all sports trophies. So they can do that. Yeah. Like they're ranked like top 10 in pretty much all these sports right now. But my question is, so I don't want to like simplify this too much.
Sure.
But I do know that right now, from the outside looking in, Kentucky football is 3-5 overall, 1-5 in the SEC. Kentucky basketball is getting ready to start a season with a new head coach who happens to be a former UK player. And so I'm wondering what the vibe is up there right now. Not maybe necessarily within the complex or within the campus, but around the campus.
It's really interesting, honestly. And I would say this. Obviously, the excitement for basketball outweighs anything that's happening with the football program right now. It's Kentucky basketball, right? It's one of one. And like you said, Mark Pope coming back, won a national championship here. Ton of excitement for that. But I will say the football discourse is still, yes, the anger and I think it's probably a good thing, honestly, from a fan base standpoint. There's anger. Like, this fan base is sick and tired of what's going on.
That means you care.
That exactly. Where there's not really, I wouldn't say there's, look, when they play Murray State in 2 weeks from now at home, I'm sure there's going to be 30,000 in the stands, right? It's not going to be some atmosphere there. But I don't think apathy is, even though that'll look like apathy, I don't think there is apathy. I think there's an anger level, a frustration level of, hey, there's no reason we can't get this thing going again, because they look at Vanderbilt. Look at what they did. They hired Jerry Kill, who brought with him Diego Pavia, and they're 5-3. They beat Bama, and they probably could have beat Texas. Like, they had their chances in that game. Yeah. And maybe they'll give Tennessee a fit at the end of the year. Who knows? You look at South Carolina. I don't want to be them offensively, but their defense is so good, it gives them a chance every week. Like, their Missouri with their NIL situation has put together 2 really good rosters in back-to-back years, and they'll probably continue to put together good rosters. Like and Kentucky's not in a bad spot NIL wise. They're still recruiting at a really high level at the high school, like higher than they ever had in the high school ranks, because they have NIL, and they're able to get guys like Brock Vandegrift and Jamin Dumas Johnson because they have NIL. But the thing, I think the fan base is frustrated that they are just they're not winning, and they're not winning at home. That's the big thing. Like you said it earlier, like they had a great environment even for this Auburn game, and the fans just haven't been rewarded at home. They're 2-11 or 2-12 in their last 14-13 SEC home games. So that, that's been a giant frustration. But I think this fan base is just ready to get answers and do things differently, whether that's Mark Stoops not going to get fired. That's just not going to happen. But if he were to retire, because there's a lot going on with his family, as we touched on, his brother obviously retired young, or if he were to, like he did last year, get another job, I think the fan base would be okay with that, and, pay their respects and let him go. But at the same time, they want to see a change in philosophy, whether that's, how they build this roster, how they just want to see something different. They want to see wins in the win column. And I think that is a good thing, that there is discourse, there is frustration and anger. It means they do care, and they understand, like, hey, in this new look SEC, like, it's not doom and gloom. Like, there's more parity than ever in this league. I mean, we see it every single week. I mean, Tennessee's been right in the middle of it, right? Where they beat Alabama for a second time in 33 years for the first time in a while. And they also lost to Arkansas. Like, that's just what can happen in the SEC. Kentucky beat Ole Miss and almost beat Georgia, and they got boat raced by Carolina and Auburn and Florida. Like, it's just, the SEC is a madhouse, and anything can happen. And I think that's also been frustrating for the fans, seeing that and knowing Kentucky themselves have been in the middle of it, and that they could be on the other end of some of these results. So I would say the vibe isn't good. To put it in summary, there's frustration there, but there's not apathy, which I am surprised and happy to see. I think there was some apathy, honestly, at the end of Cal's time, because it really became the same thing year in and year out. I will say, if Mark Stoops comes back next year and they run it back philosophy-wise and they run it back result-wise, then you're going to see that apathy until a change is made. But I think at least going into this year, where now they were 7-6 the last 2 years. So you could easily say, oh, if this game goes the other way, they're 8-4, they're 9-3. But now that you're seeing, like, okay, this is bad, I think it's bringing the fan base bringing more attention to what's going on and more discourse, which means there's a level of care.
Yeah. And I hope that the thing with Stoops comes whenever it ends, I hope it's amicable, because
it should be. It really should.
But I mean, there's, he has whatever 40 to 45 million reasons not to, retire. But
yep.
So I don't think anybody in their right mind could criticize someone for not wanting to leave that much money on the table.
Which is why Cal was going to ride it out until Arkansas game.
Especially if this is a guy who doesn't want to coach into his 60s or whatever, like he said before, then but you also just kind of, because say what you will about some of the schedule some years and other things, and it helped them that Tennessee was down and Louisville, was messy at times, but they still took the program up there to a different level and brought respectability to that place. And I hope that it can end amicably whenever it does. Yeah. But I guess last thing before we get your plugs and all that, I'll be honest, cards on the table here. I'm picking Tennessee to win this game. I haven't come up with a score yet.
I would agree with you.
I actually haven't made up my mind on the cover yet. I don't know, because
really?
I have a day and a half to figure this out at this time we're recording this, because I always pick Tennessee to beat Kentucky. The same reason I always beat Florida to beat Tennessee, just because it's what you do. It's what one does when in Rome. Sure. But I think that I could see this game being shrunk or some ways, and so I'm not really exactly sure what I'll do with that yet. But you seem to have already answered it right now. What is as specific as you care to be right now regarding this game?
Yeah, I just don't see the path. It might have been a different story if they were coming off a bye and they were healthier. It might have been a different. There's just so much going on with this program right now. It's like a perfect storm. Like so much is happening on and off the field that you don't want to happen. And now you have to go to big bad Tennessee Vols who own you in their house, sold out, blackout Neyland, all that, a place you haven't won in full capacity since the 80s. Like it's not where you want to be. I think that it's not the ideal time for this game to be on the schedule. So look, I do think, like we touched on throughout this episode, I think Kentucky's going to come in and fight. I think they're going to, like you said, they're going to try to shorten this game. They're going to try everything they can. And eventually the Jimmies and Joes are just going to take over for Tennessee, and there's not going to be much Kentucky can do about it. I think I put in writing like a 41-10 to 14 range-ish, and that's kind of where I'm at. I think it could be, I know Tennessee's offense has been a little up and down, and maybe, that number, they don't quite get to 40. Maybe it's in the 30s or the high 20s, but I just think Tennessee has too much firepower for this Kentucky team, especially if they get a 2-score lead in the first quarter or early in the second quarter. Like, that's just demoralizing for a team like Kentucky that struggles to put up points. So, I've got Tennessee, and I think they'll comfortably cover that 16.5, but hopefully I'm wrong. And, at least I'm hoping Kentucky can at least make, the folks sweat down there and at least show something to this fan base. Like, hey, look, we know we're having an awful year. We know that you're not confident in the direction of this program right now, but, we know this game here in Knoxville means a ton to you all, and we're going to go out and give them all we've got. That's, I think, what we gotta hope for. I think, I was talking to some of my colleagues on the beat, like, what do you think will calm the fans down just a little bit going into the offseason? It would be performing, like putting up a fight against Tennessee and Texas, just absolutely boat racing Murray State, and then knocking off Louisville. I think would be, 5-7 is not good, but if you do that, you're at least showing something. You're showing that Stoops still has, the locker room. You're showing that the culture is still strong, and even in dark times, you're coming to fight. So that's what I'm hoping to see, for this fan base and for this program's perspective. But I have a hard time imagining it.
Yeah, on one hand, Tennessee's offense has not scored a point in any of the past 3 first halves, which until it happened these 3 times had never happened at all for a high school football team. So that's on one hand. The other hand is they left about 24 to 34 points on the board just in the first half against Alabama, with turnovers and wide open plays that were missed. And so you didn't have to squint hard to see that they had schemed up Bama, and they could have scored 50 plus in that game if they had just, executed. And so, that's where, I'm not sure, because both of those things can be true at the same time, but one of them has to weigh more than the other. So I don't know exactly which way to go on that, but we will see. We will see. Aaron, where can we direct people to get all of the stuff that you and your site are doing, both in written form, web form, print form, audio form, video form? Give us the full Monty.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Catspaws.com, obviously 247 affiliate for Kentucky coverage. Locally here, we have our Catspaws magazine that goes bi-weekly during the basketball and football seasons. Football, basketball yearbook. Basketball yearbook is out now. Has been a hot seller, so really appreciate everyone investing in that and enjoying that. And then audio-wise, you can catch me Wednesday nights, so later tonight, 8:30, 9-ish on Believe in Kentucky podcast with Vinny Hardy, a former UK writer, and then Jalen Whitlow, former UK quarterback for a couple of years. So you can catch me there tonight. We'll be talking about this game, and then obviously basketball starting up, and the first 2 preseason games being in the books.
Yes. There's a lot going on there. And who knows, we'll probably talk to you again during basketball season, because these two are kind of always on fun. They're always on some sort of a course toward each other, at least for the past little bit. So we'll see if that continues again, and the Southern Appalachian Super Bowl can remain the Southern Appalachian Super Bowl. So again, Aaron, thank you so much for being here, man. And if y'all are, thanks to y'all for reading and for listening and for watching and all those things. If you're watching right now on YouTube, this might be the end of it. But if you're listening audio wise, you will hear the outro. But regardless, we will let Aaron get out of here now. Aaron, thanks so much for being here, man.
Anytime. No problem.